Graphic communications has a very storied history that has dramatically influenced all of us, profoundly in the way we think, act, and communicate. The graphic arts, or also known as graphic communication, is the art of communicating through visual images and has its early beginnings some 30,000 years ago. Early man, particularly in Europe, began drawing on walls of caves, known as pictographs, and carving on stone. These are known as petroglyphs. The caves of Lascaux, France, and Altamira, Spain have excellent examples of cave wall paintings created by early man and are man's earliest known attempt at a visual record of his life and communication. These pictographs were created from the use of minerals and charcoal utilizing brushes, hands, and airbrush made from hollowed reeds in which the painter would spray color from their mouth. They were beautiful, anatomically accurate. Scientists that have studied these and other cave paintings suggest that they have religious purposes, demonstrate hunting techniques, a record of events, or perhaps are simply graffiti. Whatever the purpose, any or all of these certainly are a means of visual human communication. Man began to develop other means of visual communication, including first writing, using symbols that eventually developed into formal style writing as we know today. To facilitate this, a means of writing, implements like a reed pen and writing materials such as parchment came into use. By 400 AD, a stable form of ink was made from a composite of iron salts such as ferrous sulfide, made by treating iron with sulfuric acid, was mixed with tannin from gallnuts. They grow on oak trees, and a thickener such as animal fats or even human blood. Its color, when first applied to paper, was a bluish black, rapidly turning to the familiar dull brown color commonly seen in old documents. The basic formula would remain in use for centuries. Reed pens were an early writing tool used to write on parchment, papyrus, and other materials. They were made from papyrus, sedge, or bamboo plants. Long before paper was invented, other materials, also known in the industry as substrates, were used for writing. One of these was the use of papyrus, a tall reed that grew in the deltas of the Nile River in Egypt. Egyptians made a writing material produced by weaving together strands of the pith of the papyrus plant. First, the outer rind is removed and the sticky fibrous inner pith is cut lengthwise into thin strips. The strips soaked in water were then placed side by side on a hard surface with their edges slightly overlapping. Then another layer of strips is laid on top at a right angle. While still moist, the two layers are hammered together, mashing the layers into a single sheet. The sheet is then dried under pressure. After drying, the sheet is polished with a round object like a stone, seashell, or round hardwood. Parchment was another substrate used by early cultures for writing. Parchment is a thin material made from calfskin, sheepskin, or goatskin. Its most common use is as the pages of a book, codex, or manuscript. It is distinct from leather in that parchment is not tanned, but rather stretched, scraped, and dried under tension, creating a stiff white, yellowish, or translucent animal skin. The finer qualities of parchment are called vellum. Paper and the way it was made was invented by Tao Xilong, a member of the court of the Han Dynasty in China. The paper was made from bark of trees, remnants of hemp, rags of cloth, and fishing nets. The materials were beaten into a pulp with water. It was then spread on a woven screen that allowed the water to drain and the pulp to dry into the paper. Up until this time in Asia, writings and inscriptions were generally made on tablets of bamboo or on pieces of silk called chi. In this illustration, a worker is dipping a screen into water with pulp in which a portion is lifted out and dried. At right, the pulp made from various materials is cooked before it is used to form paper. Probably the earliest form of printing was relief printing, in which the image is above the non-image area. An example of this comes from a clay disc called the Pathos disc, found on the Isle of Crete in the Mediterranean. The disc dates from the Middle to late Minoan Bronze Age. The Minoan culture flourished from approximately 2700 to 1450 BC. It has preformed hieroglyphic seals, probably made from pottery stamps that were pressed into soft clay. As of yet, it has not been deciphered. A more commonly recognized form of relief printing is woodblock printing. Eventually came into being as a method of printing on cloth. The earliest surviving examples from China date to before 220 AD and from Egypt to the 4th century. Later in Europe, during the 1400s, woodblock printing was used to print playing cards. In Japan, between the 17th and 20th century, woodblock printing produced a genre of art known as ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world. In 868 AD, the earliest known complete survival of a dated book was printed, the Dairen Sutra. It was hidden for centuries in a sealed-up cave in the northwest corner of China before being discovered. Sutra literally means a rope or thread that holds together and more metaphorically refers to a line, rule, or formula. The book deals with the nature of perception and deals with the religious teachings or sermon of the Buddha. 7 strips of yellow stained paper were printed from carved wood blocks and pasted together to form a scroll over 16 feet long. The text is one of the most important sacred works of the Buddhist faith. The screen printing method has its origins in Chinese stenciling about 960 AD during the Shang dynasty in China. It was a process where stencils were commonly used on cotton and silk for clothing and decorative purposes. However, the silk screening process we know and use today is generally credited to English and American artists in the early 1900s. Commercial screen printing became very popular around World War I. It was most commonly used for printing flags and advertising banners, and even found its way into fine art. It has continued to be very popular for fine art, and we found in the 60s, op and pop art, this was a great medium used, such as by Andy Warhol. And more recently, artists like Shepard Fairey. Screen printing is also popular in commercial printing on fabric, which is known as decorating. The graphic art certainly has a storied history, beginning with the cave wall paintings 30,000 years ago up to 1000 AD. The history of the graphic arts will continue in the next video. Printing goes into mass production.